Hello listener, the Nameless Scholar here, and today we'll be looking at our Dark Angel's wildest nightmare. The Dark Angels were the first of the Emperor's Space Marine legions, and in their earliest incarnation, fought as the personal army of the Master of Mankind in the dawning years of the Great Crusade, and in the shadowed campaigns that preceded it. Unyielding, technologically capable, ruthless and insular, the Dark Angels at the time of the Dornian Heresy were a powerful and highly independent legion, used to operating on its own to conduct large-scale campaigns and compliance actions. The scars of the latter battles of the Great Crusade would change them, as would their reunification with their Primarch, Lionel Johnson, and the introduction of fresh blood from his adopted homeworld of Caliban. All of the Astartes legions have been shaped and defined by their homeworlds, but the influence that Caliban exerts upon the Dark Angels, even 10,000 years after its destruction, is surely the most profound. At the time the Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy, Caliban was swathed in dense forests which were haunted by fierce and unnatural chimeras, known as the Great Beasts. The embattled human colonists had long since lost contact with the rest of mankind due to the warped storms of the Old Night, and much of their technological heritage had been forgotten. Even Terra itself had faded from memory to become little more than a myth. However, in the face of such adversity, the nobility of the human spirit still prevailed. Knightly orders, sworn to protect the people of Caliban, made it their calling to hunt down and destroy the great beasts. It was one of these expeditions that came across the infant Primarch wandering deep in the heart of the forests. Having been starved of human contact, the boy was feral, and yet his presence and spirit was unmistakable. The leader of the knights, a great man called Luthor, adopted the child as though he were his own son, and named him Lionel Johnson, or the Lion, the son of the forest in their dialect. Many and varied were the tests and trials to be accepted into the order, as the knights called themselves, but Luthor was an excellent tutor, and the Lion a natural warrior and strategist. From the walkings the spiral, where they honed their swordcrafts into a defense against any foe, to the verbatim, their book of tactics and teachings, Johnson excelled when he returned from the quest to hunt down and kill one of the great beasts. He did so bearing the body of the most feared and terrible creature on the planet, that of a Calibanite lion. Such a feat was more than enough to see him admitted to the order as a full knight. Luthor had always been seen as a future leader of the order, but the arrival of the lion had changed all that. Johnson had been gene-crafted to command the Emperor's legions, and these innate skills saw him rapidly eclipse his mentor. But for all of the lion's peerless talents, an echo of the feral forest child still remained. There was a coldness and detachment from human emotion about him, his bonhomie always a fraction forced and stilted. To Luthor's credit, he was never taunted by petty jealousy, as within the Lionel Johnson he saw the chance to do something more than simply continue the endless war against the great beasts. There was an opportunity to reunite all of the knightly orders and eliminate the abominations from the face of the world once and for all. Certain that Johnson was the savior of Caliban and his people, Luthor put aside personal ambition and made it his sole purpose to ensure their shared vision came to fruition. Though it took many years of blood and toil, the great beasts were systematically purged from the forests, with the forbidding North Wilds their last refuge. The final sweep brought them into contact with a group calling themselves the Knights of Lupus. which had always been vehemently opposed to their crusade. Upon approaching their fortress, it became clear why this had been so. In their isolation, they had taken to the study of sorcery, and even held a menagerie of the great beasts. That a knight could ever fall to such corruption filled Luther with loathing, and the resulting war was crushing and swift. With their protectors destroyed, the crusade to purify Caliban continued apace, and inside a short span, the very last great beast was put to the sword by the lion himself. Shortly after, as though it had been some form of nightly test of his worth, the emperor arrived upon Caliban to greet his lost son. With him came the Astartes of the First Legion, super beings which had been patterned upon Johnson's own genetic code. The lion was named Lord and Primarch of the new Dark Angels, and Caliban became the Legion's new homeworld. Johnson decreed that the best of the Order be inducted into the Legion, and to ensure that they always had a plentiful supply of arms and weapons, Caliban was to take its place in the Imperium as a properly industrialized world. As only the youngest members of the Order were able to be fully transformed with the gifts of the Gene Seed, Luther was denied the chance to become a full Astartes. Instead, he was given extensive augmentation using the new imperial science, and made up for any deficiency with characteristic skill and resolve. By the time the Dark Angels were ready to take their allotted place in the Emperor's Great Crusade, Luther had risen through merit to once more become Johnson's second-in-command. To the Calibanite Dark Angel, the Great Crusade was simply the logical extension of their quest to destroy the great beasts. Having already made their world safe for humanity, they relished the prospect of doing the same for the whole of the galaxy. However, before they could bring more than a handful of planets into compliance, Luther and a cadre of his closest brothers were ordered to leave the expeditionary fleets and return to Caliban. The Lion said that he needed to ensure a plentiful supply of new initiates for his armies, and who better for the task than the man who had raised and trained him. Luther applied himself to this vital task with diligence, ensuring that chapter after chapter of implacably trained Astartes was sent to join the Lion. Years turned into decades, and while the Astartes of the training garrison continued to perform their duties admirably, there was no sign of them ever being allowed to rejoin the Great Crusade, or even that the Lion would return to his own homeworld. Though it was not discussed openly, there was a growing unease that their Primarch had turned his back on Caliban. Worse still was the way their beloved planet had been changed since the arrival of the Imperium. Its verdant forests had been all but destroyed to make way for mines and manufactories, and its people had been forced out of their unproductive settlements. Instead, they were housed in grey, soulless hive cities called archaeologies. Despite the introduction of imperial medical technologies, health and life expectancy had, if anything, begun to worsen, and simmering discontent had broken out into strikes, civil disobedience, and even riots. Luther recognized that Caliban's true riches lay not in its minerals or war production, but in the courage and vitality of its people. Yet time and again his protests over the devastation of their planet and dispatches to the Lion were ignored. When the astropathic response finally came, it chilled Luther to the bone. Instead of throwing his support behind Luther's cause, he seemed concerned primarily with ensuring that his expedition's lines of supply did not become overextended. Their success had taken the Legion so far from the homeworld that Johnson had long considered recruiting closer to the front lines. if the industrialization of Caliban had reduced their suitability as aspirants, then now would seem the prudent time for the training garrison to select a more productive world. The revelation that his Primarch was willing to turn his back on their home so completely shocked Luther to the core. He had always considered Lionel Johnson to be the deliverer of his planet and savior of its people, but now it was clear that he was willing to see Caliban and his people pay the price for his naked ambition. Tragedy was piled upon tragedy when an investigation into the riots at the North Wilds Archaeology revealed mass sacrifices and the practice of base sorcery. Such practices had echoes of atrocities they had witnessed on warp-corrupted planets during their short time in the Great Crusade, although they never thought such things could occur on Caliban. While they were able to stop the rite from being completed, and the entity prevented from manifesting, it laid bare the canker at Caliban's heart. The archaeology had been built upon the remains of the Knights of Lupus's fortress, the group which had sheltered the great beasts, but the corruption which permeated the area still endured. The Dark Angels were not alone in comprehending the grave nature of the situation, as Imperial investigators dug through the ruins and came to the same conclusion. From having witnessed the purges of the Imperium meted out to the populations of such warp-tainted planets, Luther knew that the same fate would befall his world if news of it got out. He could not stand by and let Caliban and his people be destroyed. Their only option was to break away from the Imperium. At Luther's command, all communication and travel out of Caliban was stopped, and Imperial representatives preparing reports on the matter taken into custody. Non-indigenous workers and military personnel were hunted down and interned, and the few Terran-born Dark Angels among their ranks made to choose where their true loyalties lay. For a short while, their secret was safe, but it was only a matter of time before the silence or merely the interruption in the flow of recruits to the Lion's expeditions would be noticed. In preparation for the inevitable Imperial response, every possible advantage was sought. This even included appealing to the mythical race of creatures known as the Watchers in the Dark, which according to folklore were said to be the guardians of the Calibanite forests. Even with all of the planet's formidable defenses at their disposal, and the armories empty to equip the civilian population, they would eventually be crushed by the might of the Imperium. Only then did Luther learn of another, much more potent source of power that could be wielded, that of the demon which lay beneath the North Wilds. The mysterious Lord Cypher proved to be not just the guardian of the Legion's traditions, but also the keeper of forbidden knowledge into the nature of chaos. He claimed that the Knights of Lupus had made a close study of such things, and that their great library, which held all manner of arcane secrets, had not in fact been burned. Luther was revolted by the idea of embracing the power they had so long fought against. But with the shadow of death looming large, he regretfully accepted Cypher's aid. The silence from Caliban had drawn all manner of astropathic inquiries, but the most unexpected of all was from the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, Rogel Dorn. Rather than the half-expected declaration of war, the Emperor's Praetorian instead confessed that they were fellow conspirators against the Imperium. Dorn's new masters, the Chaos Gods, had noticed Luther's studies of their realm, and were greatly impressed with the potential it showed. Dorn went on to say that the rebellion hung in the balance, and that the presence of Luther's Dark Angels at Istvan V would be invaluable in crushing the Astartes legions which could not be convinced to join him. Though Luther was unwilling to abandon his prepared defenses, Dorne's rebellion seemed to be their only chance at throwing off the oppressive yoke of the Imperium. Dorne made offers to aid in their fight, and pointed out that the Lion's expeditions were so deeply entrenched within the Blue Stars that Luthor's forces would be able to make the trip to Istvan and back confidently before the Loyalists would be able to get back to Caliban. Though the offers of aid were tempting, what finally convinced Luthor to join Dorne at Istvan 5 was that it would be the perfect opportunity to irreparably blacken Lionel Johnson's reputation. By going to Istvan, the Dark Angels, all Dark Angels, would be seen as traitors and heretics, however vociferously it might be denied by their Primarch. Despite the relatively small number of Dark Angels present at Istvan, the Legion reaped a bloody tally against the Raven Guard, and Corax's desperation to find Rogel Dorn drove them to attack the rebel lines time and again, only to find their famed feints predicted, cut off and destroyed with consummate skill. When the slaughter was over, and the survivors spread the word of the rebellion across the Imperium, the name of Lionel Johnson was spoken with the same contempt as that of Robute Gilliman, Ferrus Manus, Vulcan, and Dorne. His task complete, Luthor returned to his homeworld, not with weapons or siege masters, but with certain arcane devices, crafted to his own specification and a name. It was the true name of the demonic entity which dwelled beneath the savage north wilds of Caliban. While the weak of mind were susceptible to the corruptions of chaos, Luthor proved to be naturally adept at wielding it as a weapon without being affected by its more self-destructive excesses. He taught this ability, which he called walking the spiral, due to its similarities to the Calibanite method of practicing swordplay, to the rest of the training garrison, the better to protect them against the coming storm. So it was that Lionel Johnson returned to Caliban for the first time in more than half a century, and headed at the head of a massed war fleet. Luthor had dubbed them the Unforgiven, both by the Imperium for their perceived treachery, and for the way they had betrayed Caliban. The angry hails for an explanation so long met with stony silence finally received a response, as every orbital defense battery and missile silo opened fire, almost ignored amongst the exchange of firepower. The true danger to the fleet was summoned from beneath the North Wilds and unleashed against the Lion's ships. Coils of warp energy made demon flesh materialize around the vessels, constricting and crushing hulls like eggshells. The sky was raked with fire as, in extremis, drop pods blossomed from the dying ships. Countless thousands of Dark Angels rained down upon their homeworld, not in their usual coordinated strikes, but simply to escape certain death in orbit. With no preliminary bombardment to suppress enemy ground fire, the result was similar to the catastrophe which had befallen the loyal legions at Istvan. Those that reached the ground alive were met not only by Luthor's Astartes and a well-armed civilian militia, but by spectral shades of great beasts which lurked within every shadow. Slowly but surely, the Unforgiven were surrounded, isolated, and pinned down. They were losing, and yet despite all this, Lionel Johnson still fought his way through the Fortress Monastery and challenged Luthor to a battle to the death. Though a Primarch, Johnson was little match for the power his mentor now wielded, and after a titanic battle, he was left broken and bloodied, the Lion's sword shattered into pieces, before Luthor could administer the final blow. A presence in the aether far different to the chorus of the demonic made itself known. A great, shuddering groan echoed through the Fortress Monastery, shattering the rock very beneath their feet and plunging Johnson down into the depths of a bottomless chasm. All across the planet, the embattled loyalist Astartes were enveloped by mystic portals of psychic force and plucked from existence before they could be cleanly executed. Any celebration was short-lived, as the remains of the portals pulsed and fluxed wildly in the warp-saturated environment. From across the planet, they converged upon the North Wilds, all the while growing larger and more destructive. All their attempts to divert or disrupt the vortices ended in failure, and when they at last reached the critical mass, the resulting explosion was the equivalent to that of an exterminatus device. The Dark Angels had broken from the Imperium and made war against their Primarch to save Caliban and his people. And yet still they had failed. In the scant hours before the end, there had barely been time for the Astartes to reach orbit, let alone evacuate the population to safety. In stunned silence, they watched in horror as the planet's crust disintegrated and the atmosphere boiled off into space, only leaving when the mountain-sized lumps of debris lifted into space by the explosion became too much of a threat. For a time they traveled without destination, simply letting the currents of the warp carry them. Though the civil war raged around them, they fought for neither side, other than to defend themselves or take supplies that they needed. They were lost souls, bereft of meaning or purpose. When their armies' wanderings eventually threw them together with the space wolves, it seemed as though their prayers for oblivion were about to be answered. There had always been barely concealed enmity between Lehman Russell's Legion and the Dark Angel expeditions, but instead of a battle, they instead found a reason to carry on. Like them, the Space Wolves had aligned themselves with chaos, specifically the worship of Khorne, but had become locked into a downward spiral of self-destruction and bloodlust. Luther and Russ bonded over their shared hatred of Johnson, and the Space Wolf was particularly appreciative of the Shattered Lion's sword, which had been rescued from Caliban as a trophy. Though the intricacies of walking the spiral were far beyond the comprehension of the Space Wolves, the Dark Angels were at least able to teach them the rudiments so that they could channel their aggression. Still content to meet annihilation and oblivion, the Dark Angels accompanied their new comrades on their journey to Terra, but their progress through the warp seemed as aimless as before. The currents of the Empyreans seemed particularly erratic, leaving them becalmed or delivering them far from their intended destination. It was at one such wrong turn that they found themselves near to a backwater world, devoid of intelligent life, but for a single reading of distinctly Astartes' origin. To their amazement, the Dark Angels found that it belonged to one of Johnson's Unforgiven, who had disappeared so mysteriously from Caliban. Only under the most excruciating of tortures did the man's tongue finally loosen to say that he had been saved by the grace of the Emperor himself. This revelation filled Luther and the Dark Angels with a drive and determination they had thought lost. Not only did they know who was to blame for the destruction of Caliban, but the Unforgiven were still out there to be captured and convinced to renounce the Lion. When the news that Dorn's heresy had been broken robbed them of the chance to kill the Emperor, it was at least tempered by the knowledge that they could still track down and enlighten their former brothers. While the Fates had conspired to keep them from the siege of Terra, the Dark Angels knew that there were other, more subtle ways to destroy the Emperor. The heresy was over, but it had left anarchy in its wake, which gave them the opportunity to undermine the Imperium not just through open warfare, but by instigating cults to the gods of chaos in all their varied aspects. Throughout all of this, they honed their ability to walk the spiral and stayed aloof from the actual worship of the warp themselves. The cults they created were simply another weapon in their arsenal, with little thought given to what might happen to them after the Dark Angels moved on. Only on rare occasions did they expend the time and effort to educate them in even the basics of walking the spiral, as the messy and self-destructive trajectories of these uncontrolled cults provoked such a hysterical overreaction from imperial authorities. On their travels, they also searched for any word of the Unforgiven, reasoning that the odds of them having encountered one on the way to Terra could not have been simple chance. After several years without even a hint of their quarry, this optimism started to fade until Luther happened to make a pilgrimage back to the broken, airless ruins of Caliban. There, on the very planet from which the Unforgiven had been snatched away, Luther was able to use his warp craft to divine what had become of them. It was clear that the Emperor's intervention had not just seen them scattered, not just through space, but also through time, and that it might be many thousands of years before all were returned to the material universe. Even for one with Luther's unearthly powers, the runes of Caliban were all but impossible to decipher. Only when one of the Unforgiven was on the verge of re-entering the physical plane does the precise time and place of this event become apparent. As soon as this occurs, the closest Dark Angel's fleets break off from their current engagements, even leaving allies in the midst of battle to track down and capture their erstwhile brother. It was not long before the Imperium became aware that the Dark Angels had returned to Caliban, and although they remained ignorant of the true purposes of these visits, they took every opportunity to bring the Legion to battle. Due to Luther's interrogation of the runes, he knows approximately when the next appearance will occur, and the Legion fights with an unbreakable determination to destroy any defenses that stand in their way. The length to which the Legion goes to identify the arrival of one of the Unforgiven is similarly reflected in the care taken to ensure they capture their targets alive, with masters who bring back a corpse frequently meeting the same fate. Once safely back in the bosom of their Legion, the Unforgiven are persuaded of their error in having sided with Lionel Johnson and turning their backs upon Caliban. If they continue to resist, the interrogator librarians are forced to use ever more extreme methods to ensure their enlightenment. For those subjects who continue to resist to the point where only death would silence their devotion to the Lion, there is but one possibility for redemption. Their bodies and souls are given over to entities from the warp. Although they see the need to possess their brothers as a great failure of skills and oratory, sometimes such things are the only way for the Unforgiven to finally achieve forgiveness. As Luther and the Dark Angels grew ever more adept at wielding the power of chaos, their schemes to destabilize the Imperium became increasingly ambitious. They found that through the precise placement of cults and massed blood sacrifices, terrible and destructive resonances could be set in place within the warp to effects far greater than the sum of their parts. The most notable example of this came in M36, when the Dark Angels took advantage of a natural increase in the activity of the Empyrean to relieve almost the whole of the Imperium in debilitating warp storms. The Astronomicon was obscured, war fleets were lost forever, and whole sectors were completely cut off, raising the specter of a return to old nights. With warp travel compromised, Forge worlds sat idle without raw materials. The populations of high worlds starved or turned to cannibalism, and imperial armies could not arrive in time to crush, dissent, or repel chaos attacks. as the walls between the real and the immaterial wore thin and a widespread loss of faith in the Emperor swept the galaxy. It was joined by the demonic pandemic of living death, known as the Plague of Unbelief. Just as the Imperium teetered on the brink of destruction, the Dark Angel's plans were thwarted by the self-sacrifice of Lorgar, of the Word-bearers at Dimamar. Just as the precise placement of cults had brought effects far beyond the sum of their parts, the events of Dimamar disrupted the carefully orchestrated resonances and averted it from reaching its full apocalyptic crescendo. The Dark Angels could, however, take comfort that through their actions they had caused the death of one of the few remaining loyalist primarchs, and better, the hated ecclesiarch of the Emperor's Ministorum. Ever since that time, the Dark Angels have been patiently working to divine ever more potent and destructive methods to destabilize the Imperium, and are certain that eventually they will be responsible for the death of their most hated foe, the Emperor himself. Addendum number 1. The Fate of Lord Cypher. As befits a figure so shrouded in mystery, the ultimate fate of Lord Cypher is suitably ambiguous. No one has borne the title within the Legion since just after the end of the Heresy, and Legion records on the matter are sealed. Some claim that he was killed in battle, the most common rumor being that it was against the Salamanders, while others say that he simply cast aside the name of his own reasons and instead put his pistol-wielding skills to use in one of the Legion's assault squads. As always, the most enduring fury is also the most outlandish. It postulates that he became consumed by the fury angrily proposed by Leman Russ at the Conclave of Nicaea, that the soul-binding process left the Emperor vulnerable to corruption by sorcery, and went about trying to bring this to fruition. Experimentation, including the attempted possession of soul-bound test subjects, such as astropaths, proved to be catastrophically messy failures, and indicated that the Emperor's spirit was in fact immune to the corruption by this method. Undeterred by these setbacks, Cypher is said to have attempted the possession of one of the soul-bound Thousand Suns, and that the resulting psychic explosion incinerated them both, along with several adjacent decks of the ship on which they were traveling. While the truth may never be known, the Thousand Suns are noticeable by their absence from the groups of forcibly possessed Astartes used in battle by the Dark Angels. The Runes of Caliban are located in the Canian sector, to the galactic north of the Eye of Terror. Prior to the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, the death world of Caliban was covered with lush forests, inhabited by monstrous creatures, warped by the proximity of chaos in the Eye of Terror. The humans of the planet were a proud, martial people, forced to live in great stone fortress monasteries. The Dark Angels eventually rebuilt their fortress monastery on the asteroid that had borne the original fortress monastery of the Order, known as the Alduruk, the Rock of Eternity. In one of the old Calibanite dialects of Low Gothic, Alduruk was originally the name of the mountain that the Order's founders had decided for the site to build their fortress monastery, using the name of the mountain for the fortress. Though the Order had the other fortress monastery, Alduruk was their first, and so they gave it a name that mattered. A name that summed up exactly what they were trying to build. This sacred site was the Order's literal rock, their foundation of stone. As long as it endured, then some part of their ideals would always be alive. The Dark Angels drilled deep into the old bedrock and rebuilt the runes into a vast new complex with advanced imperial technology worthy of a chapter of Astartes. The Fortress Monastery is known officially as Angelicasta, the Tower of Angels, but is more commonly referred to as the Rock, just like its ancient predecessor, Alduruk, though this term is more properly applied to the dead asteroid that is all that remains of lost Caliban. Following the destruction of Caliban, the Dark Angels make the Rock their new home. Never was there a gloomier sight, for although the warp storm that scoured Caliban could not penetrate the Fortress Monastery of Alduruk's shields, they left an indelible mark. Massive labor was undertaken to carve out deeper and deeper catacombs beneath the asteroid's bedrock, excavating room for an entire Space Marine Legion. Docks were eventually added, allowing for the entrance of spacecraft. Although it took centuries to complete, the Rock was also outfitted with warp drive engines, allowing the Dark Angels' new headquarters to travel across the galaxy through the ties of the immaterial. Although only a fraction of what was once Caliban, the Rock is larger than even the heaviest class of starship, and it bears formidable firepower. The sheer size of its mass are studded with gun turrets, ANS batteries, torpedo tubes, observation blisters, and communication relays. Its cavernous docking bays can accommodate many hundreds of smaller craft, including Thunderhawk gunships, Nephilim jet fighters, and even escort frigates. Lionel Johnson had introduced the First Legion of the Space Marines, the organizational structure he had learned from the Order on Caliban. The Lion's tenets of loyalty, discipline, and self-efficiency were incorporated into everything the First Legion did. As the Legion had been created from Terran warriors gifted with the gene seed of the Stalwart, if reticent, Lionel Johnson, the Dark Angels had always been regarded as dedicated and serious-minded warriors, like their primogenitor. They were slow to anger, but tenacious and all but unstoppable once roused. Before the Dornian Heresy, a Space Marine Legion might count 10,000 or more warriors under a single command, though the exact numbers of the Dark Angels Legion in the days of the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy remain unknown in current Imperial records, though the Legion was considered to be moderate size for the time. Under the Lion's supervision, the First Legion was organized into specialized formation known collectively as the Hexagrammaton, and colloquially as the Six Wings. These specialized formations existed outside the regular chain of command and organization of the Dark Angels Legion. These formations were an amalgamation of Terra, pre-Principia Bellicosa approach and organization of the proscribed formations of the early Legione Astartes and Caliban's knightly orders. Before the creation of the first Space Marine Legions, the Legione Astartes were organized into a formation known as the Six Hosts of the Angels of Death, with each of these hosts having its own specialization and purpose. Following the first reunification with their Primarch, Lionel Johnson on Caliban, the Lion incorporated the traditions of the Six Hosts and the Order. Thus, the Six Wings were created. The First Legion followed the principles of the Principia Bellicosa, organizing their legion's strength into chapters, which were led by masters, and orders, which were led by paladins. These formations were further broken down into companies led by captains. Members of the Six Wings were distributed amongst squads and companies, where they acted as captains, sergeants, and line legionnaires, or in specialized formations when assembled on orders from their respective voted lieutenant of a wing. These lieutenants acted as both commander of their wing and often acted as counsel to their primarch. Voted lieutenants were elected by their peers rather than being nominated by a superior. They would then have their nominated successor chosen to command the wing in the event of their untimely death, so as not to interrupt the cohesiveness of a wing's command. On the field of battle, a commander responsible for an area of operations or campaign had to request the intervention of one of the 6 wings. When such a request was made and eventually accepted, the members of the requested wing were summoned from their duties, when possible, in order to assemble and conduct operations under the command of their voted lieutenant's orders. The Hexagrammatons Formations that existed within the Dark Angels Legion at the time of the Great Crusade and the Dornian Heresy were the Death Wing, Dread Wing, Fire Wing, Iron Wing, Storm Wing, and Raven Wing, which all but the Death Wing and the Raven Wing were abandoned. Although the Dark Angels still retain a semblance of their original organizational structure, the requirements of their situation have necessitated the inclusion of certain subtle changes. Luthor holds the position of Supreme Grand Master of the Dark Angels, as well as the title of Master of Caliban. This is not simply a relic of history or bitter reminder of past failures, as the remnants of their planet are vital to the Legion's future. The first chapter, under Luthor's personal command, is notable in that it is composed entirely of Terminator-clad veterans, known informally as the Death Wing. They are responsible for securing the Caliban system, while their lord divines the runes for signs of the unforgiven. The Legion's chapters are far more conventional, being composed of up to 1,000 power-armored battle brothers. The chapters are self-sufficient, their fleets spread throughout the galaxy, and each containing a contingent of Raven Wing, the better to respond to the emergence of one of their erstwhile brothers. The masters of the chapters are supported by interrogator librarians, who study the intricacies of the Empyrean and harness the power of the warp in all its forms. The Legion's most senior members may be inducted into a group which is privy to the deepest secrets of chaos. To enter this inner circle is to risk madness and death, and only those most adept at walking the spiral are permitted to transcend to this new level and unlock the gifts therein. Once captured, the unforgiven are convinced of their mistake in having followed the Lion and of having turned their backs upon Caliban, either through persuasion or by possession. They are presented before Luthor, and then return to a place of honor within the chapter that found them. While these individuals are rarely allowed to rise to any position of authority, they are an important part of the chapter as they symbolize the reason why the Dark Angels continue to fight their long war. As the First Legion, the Dark Angels were originally outfitted with a panoply of arms drawn not from the fruits of the Emperor's pact with Mars, but instead from the arsenal of the Unification Wars of ancient era, relic weapons and technologies of great potency. Long after the other legions were formed, and the Great Crusade standardized much of the Space Marine Legion's war gear, the Dark Angels retained many of these ancient and potent relics, as well as the techno-arcana that resided within them. They continued to employ weapons whose secrets were never fully yielded to Mars or Space Marine brethren by the Emperor's own command. When the Dark Angels take to the field of battle, especially when it is to hunt down members of the Unforgiven, the first to arrive are most commonly the Raven Wing, named after the knightly cavalry of old Caliban. These bike-mounted brethren operate far ahead of the main force through their knowledge of the intricacies of the Empyrean, They are able to locate the fastest currents through warp space and reach their destination with unparalleled swiftness. Using their speed and skill, they are able to run their prey to ground and leave far behind anything they can't overcome by surprise. However, if the Unforgiven continues to elude them, the arrival of the rest of the Legion will seal their fate. In combat, the Dark Angels are strictly controlled and intensely focused upon their mission, a trait all too often lacking in other Chaos Legions. While hunting down their former brothers, it is of the utmost importance that the target taken is alive. This precludes the use of orbital bombardments or artillery, but as soon as the Unforgiven has been secured, the full fury of the Legion is unleashed to eliminate any witnesses on more conventional battlefields. The power of chaos is wielded to great effect. Their interrogator librarians can hurl magics at the enemy, conjure up terrible nightmares to stalk the battlefield, or predict the path of future events. They also anoint their brothers to carry the blessings of the Dark Gods for the duration of the battle. Although the Legion does not allow demons to possess their own bodies, the practice is used extensively for normal humans, be they willingly cultists or captives. These highly unpredictable forces are used as terror weapons and cannon fodder. Treated with contempt, any survivors are forgotten as soon as the battle's ended, without even a bolt shell to end their pitiful existence. Treated with more care are captured enemy Astartes, whose far more robust physiques mean that they can stand up to the rigors of demonic possession for far longer than a single battle. Of all the legions, the capture and desecration of a word-bearer is always the most satisfying, as to witness their devotion to the Emperor Curdle is a truly sight to behold. The most brutal and dangerous of missions, from the storming of imperial fortresses to the boarding of enemy warships, are spearheaded by the veteran brothers of the Deathwing, in remembrance of the Fortress of Caliban. Their Terminator armor is of the darkest green, and nothing can stand against their implacable advance. The Dark Angels utilize every aspect of the Chaos Pantheon, but are far from being blind zealots. They are instead coldly analytical in their approach. It is their belief that through the application of the warp, they can harness and wield it as a potent weapon to further their own ends, in particular, bringing about the downfall of the Emperor and the capture and conversion of the Unforgiven. Through the teachings handed down by Luthor, they have limited their exposure to its most corrupting properties, although they are more than happy to subject others to its effects and are instrumental in the propagation of cults to the ruinous powers throughout the Imperium. They have also attempted to educate other Chaos Legions in aspects of their chosen paths, most notably in the case of the Space Wolves, but also the Raven Guard, who they tutored in the ways of siege after the loss of their mysterious progenitor. Other legions, such as the tortured Blood Angels and the self-loathing Salamanders, are less receptive to their insights and are even openly hostile, for which they are all the poorer. While chaos is the means by which the Dark Angels carry out their plans, the thing that drives them is their endless hunt for the Unforgiven. Luthor's obsession, as the Chaos Legions see it, with trying to obliterate any sign of his dead Primarch's existence, to the point of convincing the Lion's followers of the righteousness of their cause at all costs, is seen as dangerous distraction. There are countless examples where they have been fighting alongside other legions, only to break off from the assault at a critical juncture to investigate the role of one of their brethren, and in the process handing their enemies a victory. This self-destructive urge has soured otherwise warm relations with allies, and has even been cited by outsiders as an unconscious manifestation of malal within their character. So haunted was the Legion by Lionel Johnson's threat of recruiting from worlds other than Caliban, that in the wake of the destruction of their homeworld, they stubbornly refused to take any new initiates. Though it took many decades, the decline in their numbers eventually forced Luthor to decree that the Dark Angels would have to recruit once more or face extinction. This was done only grudgingly, and rather than taking initiates from wherever they found suitable stock, as is common with other fleet-based legions, they have instead returned time and again to less than a score of planets. Now with Dorn's Heresy 10,000 years behind them, the overwhelming majority of the Legion draws its heritage back to the new recruiting planets, such as Chimeria, Tessera, Rubis, or Clades Tertius. Despite this, though, their training and psychic conditioning, all brothers carry with them a deep sense of bereavement for the loss of noble Caliban. The Legion pointedly avoids sowing the seeds of chaos close to their recruiting roles, so as to prevent their future brethren from becoming corrupted. And over the millennia, the Dark Angels have become fiercely protective of these planets. Despite most of them being under Imperial rule, many a Dark Angel has fought and died in their defense, be it against the Orcs at Piscina 4, or to purge the Plains world of Genestealer infestation. Each brother is similarly driven to ensure that the nightmare of losing a homeworld is not repeated. The Dark Angel's skill at keeping the corrupting influence of the warp at bay is reflected in the quality of their gene seed, which is by far the least corrupted of any of the Chaos Legions. This is due mainly to their ability to walk the spiral, but it is also a tribute to the zeal of the Legion's apothecaries. Progenioids are harvested from the Battle Brothers as soon as they mature to minimize the possibility of corruption, are minutely scrutinized, and stored inside specially shielded vaults until required. Although all of the implants continue to function, the gene seed has accumulated a number of flaws, while not sufficient to noticeably impair their performance. The difference is apparent on the rare occasions they are able to compare it to progenoids harvested from captured members of the Unforgiven. As for their battle cry, upon the battlefields of Istvan V and during the Great Crusade, the Dark Angels declared they fought for the Lion and for Caliban. To blacken their hated Primarch's name, now though a multitude of battle cries are used, with the honor of choosing and initiating the chant offered primarily to one of the redeemed Unforgiven. So I dub thee Unforgiven.